Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Well, hello. Hi, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, December 31st, 2021. This is definitely the last show of the year. Totally not going to do any more this year. I'm thinking about maybe doing one more this year. No, there's no room for it, and I just won't do it. Okay, I'll take the rest of the day off. It's time for us to kick things off. And yes, Bill has gotten wind of my proposed New Year's resolution. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This morning, Kagro X seals Eastern Orthodox 2020 in concrete, yes, and prepares to toss it off a cliff. And why not? It's about that time of year. Yeah, next year I hope to take advantage of the Eastern Orthodox community less often in the hopes that they don't ever realize what's going on and never take offense. But it's now one of my favorite callback jokes, and I have to stick with it. This is the end, though, of 2021. I considered briefly taking the day off, but I insist on punishing myself for realizing that all of the holidays were falling on Saturdays, and I'm such a martyr that, yeah, all right. Anyway, I still feel like we got ripped off somehow in this week. And when Christmas and New Year's fall on a Wednesday, and businesses close early on Tuesday or even close entirely on Tuesday, and they're closed on a Wednesday, and they're closed the day after, and it just feels like everybody gets a mini vacation. And with it on the weekend, it doesn't feel quite the same, even though people then take off Friday. Not me, because I work in my house, and it's really difficult for me to justify taking off. Also, everybody's asleep right now. The whole production crew, they're off, they're asleep, and I don't know. I should be like pre-recording shows ahead of time for the future on a day like today, but I'm not. I'm celebrating just like you. Once I get done, a couple last shopping runs, I think, before the collapse of society. They're timing it very well, I think. Whoever put the PR for the end of civilization together thought this through very well with a little dramatic flair, that the end of the year should bring a massive plague that collapses all of society by making everybody sick all at once. But I will have plenty of, taco seasoning for one thing. Lots of olive oil, that's good news. I went out and did a bit of shopping, going to do some more like it today. Maybe take advantage of, I've been meaning to do this throughout 2 years of pandemic, but really take advantage of ordering ahead and getting curbside delivery into the car. You know, this is one of those things that everybody took advantage of early, and I've been reluctant to do it because I want to pick the box of cereal. What if they bring me a dented box of cereal? You know, more realistically, for instance, the produce. I wonder about, would they pick as juicy an apple as I? Would they pick as brightly colored a banana as I don't know, and I never allow myself to do it. And usually also I say, I don't want to be sitting around waiting for them to deliver the thing. I'd rather do the active walking around the store and pick things myself. And then I know when my shopping is going to be done because I'm doing it. I don't like waiting for things like that. But I'm going to try and do that today. I recommend you all, stock up. Make sure you have what you need to make it through a couple weeks of possibly rocky times. Could get through this just fine because something, blah, 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 mild. But we'll see about that. And lots of people, of course, calling for us to make sure that the schools stay open. Here in Loudoun County, by the way, I'm a little bit concerned about that, more so than usual, because I think we've been under such unusual pressure with our school board that politically I think they might be afraid to close the schools, even if they really kind of need to. They've already put out their letter saying, no, we're not pushing back the restart date because we believe our protocols, yada, yada, the protocols were never adequate to begin with. Omicron is going to do some real damage, I think. But other school systems have, I think, a little bit more leeway. And when when it comes time for them to make their decision here in Loudoun County, I think they'll be under pressure. Remember, Glenn Youngkin will be inaugurated as governor shortly here in Virginia, and Loudoun County was so pivotal in the campaign, the PR side of the campaign. Of course, they lost Loudoun County overwhelmingly. Democrats performed admirably in the face of the national news onslaught, and Youngkin was defeated by some 10, 11 points here in Loudoun County. But nonetheless, I think they might be gun-shy about doing what they need to do, and won't be taking the lead on anything in terms of closing the schools in advance of Omicron. Of course, they don't really have the data to do it yet, so I can't say that they're going against the science. It all is anticipatory right now, and I don't know. I think they might have been bolder about anticipating problems than they will be now, thanks to the stupid election and the things that went on during it. All right. Well, at any rate, we've got that ahead of us. Plus, of course, end of the week and end of the year wrap-ups. We've got all sorts of stories to share. We have the governor of Florida missing. Rest in peace, Ron DeSantis, who obviously died at some point during the last couple of days, almost assuredly killed by COVID. Almost assuredly not the case, but that's what everyone is having fun speculating, because apparently Ron DeSantis hasn't been seen in public for quite some time. And his state's in a bit of a crisis at the moment. Florida has been, and I guess will continue to be, impacted by Omicron variant COVID. It's been a terrible impact. Like New York, they've been taking the brunt of it. Their numbers are astronomical. Once again, the United States, by the way, shattering all previous records for single-day new case reports. Anyway, reports. And I have to stress that. But I do think that even today's reports are, by most estimations of the experts out there, they're all willing to say that it's almost assuredly an undercount. How big an undercount you can debate, but there are surely many, many people testing themselves at home, having hoarded all the home test kits and finding themselves positive and reporting it to no one. Plus, of course, many, many people probably are positive, showing up at test sites and not getting tested, either because the line is too long and they turn around and go home, or in some cases they run out of test kits, or in some cases no test kits show up whatsoever, as is the case in, I don't know. Well, this morning I happened to have seen that Jeff Charlotte tweeting from Vermont that was the case, that they showed up at a testing site, and testing site people say, can't test you. The tests didn't show up. I don't know why. He doesn't know why. He's tweeting the governor to see if he can find out why. He's pretty angry, and I can't blame him. But, then it'd be really interesting to see what the story is after the fact. If it's something like, well, the truck driver who was supposed to drive the tests to the test site is sick with COVID, and what do you want him to do? So flights being canceled. I'm sure shipments being delayed all over the place. I have my own complaint. I don't want to get too down on them. But as I told you, I ordered a bunch of N95 or KN95 masks in very fashionable black, as well as functional white, from projectn95.org. And, they sent me the nice email that says, okay, your order's been processed and you can expect delivery of your masks by December 30th, which was yesterday, and I did not get those masks. And, okay, shipping is a little screwed up. I emailed them and asked, because I also noticed that the email said, we'll send you a second email when there's a tracking number so you can track your package. Oh, I want to do that. And then I noticed, hey, I have not gotten that email. So I emailed them, and they said, oh, yeah, about that. We didn't ship your package because we don't have the N95 masks that you want. Oh, well, it's your basic model. I didn't buy anything fancy. Yeah, well, you know how it is with supplies. So, it was supposed to be delivered yesterday, but it hasn't actually been shipped yet. So I don't know whether I'm going to get the things, and I don't know whether it's their fault or not. Supply chain being what it is, and people being sick, and people needing those masks everywhere, and maybe there will be a mask shortage as well. Thankfully, I have a backup source for KN95s locally, twice the price, and they know it, but at least I have some in hand, and at least we've got that. But, like I said, society collapsing. We'll see how it goes. The point is, will I have enough produce, and will the produce be shiny and undamaged, and will the cereal be in boxes that are undented, as though I had chosen them myself. It's going to be a big day. Anyway, let's see. Plenty to catch up on. As I said, Ron DeSantis probably not dead, but everybody is asking where he is because Florida is in crisis and he's nowhere to be found. And while I could understand the idea that he might be on vacation of some sorts with his family, it's usually handled this way. I'm the governor of a state. I need to leave staff behind. And if I'm on vacation and there's a crisis, call me and I'll do some things or coordinate some communications and we'll tell people, yeah, I'm on vacation with my family right now, but I have my eye on what's going on here in lovely whatever state you happen to be governing. And you can pretend a lot better. This time, I guess if you're supposed to believe his communications staff, he's on vacation, but he told his staff, I'm on vacation, I'm not telling you where, and I won't let you contact me. And if there's a problem, you just assure people I'm totally alive. And one thing you might want to do is tweet out old pictures of me using my Twitter account to prove that I'm alive by showing that I have ordered you to send out old pictures. For instance, last night he sent out something about, some bagel shop that he happened to have visited as though, well, here I am on December 30th having bagels at the bagel shop at 7 p.m., which isn't a thing that happens. And, everybody noticed, hey, I think everybody saw it and said, as opposed to, hey, I remember that, pardon me, I remember that fabulous picture of you at that bagel shop. You can't fool me. You tweeted that 2 weeks ago. I think people just said, I bet anything that this is an old picture. And I don't know whether some looked at metadata, but I think some people just scrolled back on his Twitter feed and said, yeah, there it is. 13 days ago, you visited this bagel shop and tweeted this picture. Why are you retweeting it now as though this were proof of life? So we wait to find out what happened. And it may very well be that he's on vacation and doesn't give a goddamn what happens to Florida or Floridians, and instructed his people, don't you interrupt me under any circumstances. I don't care who dies. So, that would be interesting to find out as well. Plus, of course, the other speculations. He's on vacation, but he's on vacation internationally. He's on vacation somewhere politically unsavory, possibly. Others have suggested the Appalachian Trail, which is not, in fact, a vacation, but rather adulterous activity. But we don't know where Mrs. DeSantis is either, so I don't know. Maybe it's an equal time thing. I have no idea. More, concerning is the possibility that he himself has COVID, which wouldn't bother me a great deal, except that his wife, I understand, is fighting breast cancer, and that might make her particularly susceptible, and it would be an awful thing if he carried it home and gave it to her, unless she too was an awful person. I don't know. In either case, it's not a great scenario. And I don't know. All I can tell you is if I was the governor of a state in crisis like that and my wife had breast cancer, as I said yesterday, I would be mandating vaccines and probably, sewing masks to people's faces, or as others propose, hot glue gunning them to their faces and darting people with vaccine from helicopters just to protect her. But or if one of the kids was sick or something like this, why wouldn't you do that for a family member? It's a great way to be personally corrupt, if you ask me, right? You're doing something, making policy for the benefit of a family member. Well, really for the benefit of everyone. So that's pretty good cover. You should maybe think about making that policy. Anyway, someday soon we'll figure out where he was. Justice was tweeting last night. He said, we want proof of life for Ron DeSantis. And I was like, no, we don't. Not really. We want proof of what happened to him. That's all. If it's proof of life, so be it. But, I'll take what I can get on the guy. So anyway, we'll see in a couple of days. And then he'll say, I guess the big fear, if there is one, is that he did, in fact, bring COVID home and give it to his wife. And then he'll come out outraged, pretending to be outraged. How dare liberals attack me at this sensitive time, and even though he did nothing to protect her from the raging virus, and did nothing to protect anybody from the raging virus, and may well have brought it home to her. But he'll be the victim in all of this, and we'll all be the terrible people for pointing out he should have maybe taken better care of his family and the state, and just been a better person from the beginning. But that will become invalid criticism shortly, I am sure. But I'm out in front of that one, giving you the most invalid criticism as early as I can do it. Yeah, all right. Let's see. We'll dive into what's in pocket for some of the longer reads to bring you up to date. Plus, of course, scan through the Twitter feed to see what's happening here and now. Let's see, what did I put this away for? Oh, yes, okay. That's related to another of the longer read stories that we got to get to. Oh, by the way, we also have to wish best of luck to the entire state of Colorado and probably all neighboring states. Wildfires apparently burning down entire communities. It's, late December, middle of winter. They should be sitting under 2 feet of snow, but instead they're on fire. Nothing wrong with the climate or anything like that. But yes, I guess what they're calling the Marshall Fire has, according to the Denver Post here, consumed some 1,600 acres. And by the way, on those acres, several hundred houses. I mean, we say it like it's consumed these acres, but it's consumed, people's homes and photographs and pet beds and toothbrushes and all the important things that go with Christmas trees, Christmas presents, all of that kind of stuff. Gone up in flames. I think I saw last night as they were circulating the story from the Superior area. That's, I guess, the name of the town there. That some 580 houses had already been burnt. And, I mean, it's going crazy. It's also something like 100-mile-an-hour winds, which no fire in the middle of December, you would be saying, what is going on here? It's not a blizzard. It's just wind and no precipitation. I assume the precipitation is coming behind it because, what else would produce this kind of wind but an enormous storm front coming through? That would be helpful. I think it snowed a little bit. Might help slow down the fire. But, yeah, apparently north of Denver, these suburbs, Superior and Louisville, losing hundreds of homes, people evacuating. Imagine, that much more difficult to evacuate. Middle of the Christmas break, middle of a COVID wave, just disastrous. So we wish good luck to everybody who happens to be out there, permanently, or I think just recently, everybody's good Twitter friend, Angry Black Lady, has moved there. She just moved right into the path of the fire, and she's taking it pretty well. That's probably because she's high, but that's the way she deals with a lot of things. At any rate, she was laughing. I can't believe I just paid $5,000 to move all my stuff out here, and then it's into the path of a fire. But yeah, and Travis, who I was just speaking of the other day, I haven't seen him tweet about it yet, but he's been preoccupied with the other tragedy that has struck Denver. Denver has had a rough go of it this week. They had a shooting spree, mass shooting, just the other night, and I don't know, another one of those bizarre situations where a alt-right, neo-Nazi, white supremacist guy snapped and went around and shot a bunch of people, and apparently it's been coming for a long time. He's been writing explicitly about his desire to do this, and Travis had mentioned to me, he brought the shooting to my attention early on before I read about it in the news, and said he actually knew some of the victims. So I can't imagine what that must be like. And then to be followed up by this fire danger and the Omicron wave. Okay, best of luck to all of those dealing with that in the area. I have a brother out there, and they their family was packed up and in pre-evacuation, whatever that means. I think that means pack a bag and get ready to go. And if the house next to you burns down, leave. And it's dangerous. So best of luck to everyone dealing with that. I hope things are settling down. I don't have any more recent news on it because at some point I just had to go to sleep. And just wish everyone well. But, man, I hope things look better for you in the new year, I guess. Wow. Anyway, let's see. The other things I wanted to bring to your attention. Let me read you something that I thought was of some interest. A good follow-up to some of the reading we were doing yesterday, just in terms of the danger, the thin ice on which what passes for democracy still rests. I picked up this piece. Is this new? Let's see. Yes. From NPR. On the byline here are Mary Louise Kelly, Noah Caldwell, and Ashish Valentine, who have written a piece reiterating the danger. Retired general warns the U.S. military could lead a coup after the 2024 election. I'm not sure who he thinks they would lead the coup for. But I'll find out, and I'll let you know. Well, we'll all find out at the same time, actually. As the anniversary of the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol approaches, oh, yes, and that reminds me that the former guy, apparently, or the other words for TFG, as others have said, that effing guy, has outright decided to schedule a January 6th anniversary press conference from Pervolago. And the Pervolago name, that much more relevant these days. I do find it interesting. It's gutsy and bold, don't you think, that an allegedly former president of the United States has scheduled a press conference, one, to celebrate the insurrection of January 6th, on the anniversary of January 6th, and two, to have scheduled this press conference at the site of Ghislaine Maxwell's crimes. It's a little bold, a little pervy, and we congratulate him for it. Most people probably would have shied away from the location, but then again, he lives there. He has moved in to the scene of Ghislaine Maxwell's crimes and permanently occupies the space as his domicile. So, he's an interesting guy. I again, would have probably looked for another location. But at least we'll know where he is. He's the other Florida man we have to keep an eye on, and we'll know where he is. He'll be at Pervolago on January 6th. Don't strike. Anyway, what I'm saying here is the military could lead a coup, and it could go either way, I think. But we'll see what the general thinks. As the anniversary of the insurrection approaches, 3 retired U.S. generals have warned that another insurrection could occur after the 2024 presidential election, and the military could instigate it. I wonder if they would elect a general. The generals, Paul Eaton, Antonio Taguba, and Stephen Anderson, made their case in a recent Washington Post op-ed. I think we noted that, and I hope that there'll be more to it in this NPR article. They said there, in short, we are chilled to our bones at the thought of a coup succeeding next time. Paul Eaton, a retired U.S. Army Major General and a senior advisor to vote vets, spoke with NPR's Mary Louise Kelly earlier this week. Below are highlights of the conversation. I appreciate them giving us highlights here. How could a coup play out in 2024? Is the first question. The real question, though, is apparently the first question is a fake question, according to General Eaton, who says that the real question is, does everybody understand who the duly elected president is? If that is not a clear-cut understanding, that can infect the rank and file, or at any level in the U.S. military. That's a good point, and not one that we have considered yet, because it was clear-cut to most normal people, 80-something% of normal-ish people, who won the 2020 presidential election, even though the former guy was doing his best to confuse people about that issue. But different circumstances may prevail in 2024. What if it really is less clear who actually won. And with all the work Republicans are doing to muddy the waters, that could be the case. So, just to continue on here, when we saw it when 124 retired generals and admirals signed a letter contesting the 2020 election. We're concerned about that, and we're interested in seeing mitigating measures applied to make sure that our military is better prepared for a contested election should that happen in 2024. And it is concerning. We have 3 retired generals saying, hey, we shouldn't do this. And they, whoever they are, have 124 retired generals and admirals, in case they were going to attack us by sea. And they say the opposite. No. The former guy actually won. That is a little worrisome, but I don't know how much influence former generals and admirals have. Again, I'm not as worried about the Navy as a force in this coup, but, maybe they could surprise me. They could get off the ships. That's always possible. Even Darwin leaves the ship every once in a while, right? Now he's left permanently. Anyway, how worried is he on a scale of 1 to 10? I see it as a low probability, but high impact. I'll rank it that way. I hesitate to put a number on it, but it's an eventuality that we need to prepare for. In the military, we do a lot of wargaming to ferret out what might happen. You may have heard of the Transition Integrity Project that occurred about 6 months before the last election. I have. You did. We read about it. We played 4 scenarios. Who's involved in this one? Okay. And what we did not play is a U.S. military compromised. Not to the degree that the United States is compromised today, as far as 39% of the Republican Party refusing to accept President Biden as president, but a compromise nonetheless. So we advocate that that particular scenario needs to be addressed in a future war game held well in advance of 2024. Sounds like a good idea. Keep an eye out for it. And I'll have to think about a poisoned military. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netflix Radio. Let's read a little bit more about what General Eden has to say here. Yeah, good idea for us to play out war games again under any circumstances, and this time to include the possibility of the military deciding to become involved. Maybe not as a whole, but some factions of the military. Next question here for the general, who's not actually here, like Ron DeSantis. Can the current Pentagon leadership handle it? I'm a huge fan of Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, a huge fan of the team that he has put together and the uniformed military under General Milley. They're just superb, and I'm confident that the best men and women in the U.S. and our military will be outstanding. Outstanding! That's a military word for some reason. They use that all the time. Outstanding! I guess when we see drill sergeant characters played in the movies all the time. They love outstanding, and I guess real generals do too. Let's see. I just don't want the doubt that has compromised or infected the greater population of the United States to infect our military. Well, certainly could, although they do live somewhat insular lives, the active duty military, but that can be just as dangerous as anything. What's going on in that insular existence? If we don't know, well, could be anything. What should the military do? It's a good question. I had a conversation with somebody about my age, and we were talking about civics lessons, liberal arts education, and the development of the philosophical underpinnings of the U.S. Constitution. That's nice. Just a little chat. I mean, we do it. And I believe that bears a reteach to make sure that each and every 18-year-old American truly understands the Constitution of the United States, how we got there, how we developed it, and what our forefathers wanted us to understand years down the road. That's an important bit of education that I think we need to readdress. I wonder if you could do that in the military. I don't know if that would be a great idea, but I guess you could try. I don't know if you could control what gets said. I'd have some doubts about what, I have some doubts about what they're telling people at the U.S. Air Force Academy, for instance. So that's probably a realistic worry at this point. I believe, he continues, that we need to wargame the possibility of a problem. He's very into this. He's very much pushing the war games. I'll agree. I believe that we need to wargame the possibility of a problem. And what are we going to do? The fact that we were caught completely unprepared militarily and from a policing function on January 6th is incomprehensible to me. Civilian control of the military is sacrosanct in the U.S., and that is a position that we need to reinforce. Are civics lessons weak tea to stave off an insurrection? Well, good question. A component of that, unsaid, is that we all know each other very well, and if there is any doubt in the loyalty and the willingness to follow the oath of the United States, the support and defend part of the U.S. Constitution, I guess their oath in the military, then those folks need to be identified and addressed in some capacity. When you talk to a squad leader, a staff sergeant, a 9-man rifle squad, he knows his men and women very, very well. True. Okay, well, that's those are the highlights of his interview. I don't think he wanted to express that much more doubt than that and make people really nervous. But anyway, I'm glad for it being a short interview. Just give us some idea of what he's thinking and something that we ought to be thinking about as the next elections approach. Very worrisome. Okay, let's see. Other things to catch up on. I keep forgetting why I put this here. Yes, okay. And reminding myself, look, I have to open up some of the things that I put away, which are tweets, because you can't tell what they're tweeting about, actually. Let's see. How about a little Omicron update? I found a thread that I thought Greg might have shared with us if he were scheduled to be in on a Friday. He is not, but it might come up on Monday. But whatever, let's jump the gun on it a little bit. Professor Christina Pagel, P-A-G-E-L, who is, let's see, director of, okay, I don't know what this is, but it looks pretty important. And let's see. What is it? I have to follow like 9 links to find out what we're talking about. UCL is at the base. University College London. Okay. Not a local outfit for me, so I forget about it. But the director of University College London's CORU, which is the Clinical Operational Research Unit. A professor of operational research, I think that was a prof operational research. Not, okay, whatever. Passionate about healthcare, we know that, and a number of other things. But she writes a thread on England and Omicron and what's going on. Jolly old England, all sick there. I said yesterday when we were talking to Greg, I was a little concerned about the idea that it was a foregone conclusion. Well, I wouldn't say it was that strong. Anyway, it was stated as a possibility anyway. That's the opposite of what I said, foregone conclusion. That the spikes were dropping in South Africa and in Germany. Germany was brought up, and both countries' charts on worldometers bore that out. But it was also said that, okay, well, in England they are plateauing. And I said, well, their chart doesn't seem to illustrate that. But one, I may have misheard it, that it was, well, all of England is plateauing. Well, and it may well have been that they were just talking about London cases, because that gets mentioned here by the professor. But, well, let's see what she has to say, and then you'll see why I grabbed this thing. So here's the thread. My take on it, she says, that the too long didn't read, summary of it is, things are pretty bad, and I'm sad and bewildered at the lack of government action and general levels of hopium. Get it? Hopium. One of just 18 tweets, but here we go. First off, cases. Reported levels in England now are more than twice as high as the previous peak last January. We also had a peak last January, right? And more than 3 times higher than at the start of December, this December. That's how quickly it's growing, right? Latest numbers reflect infections before the Christmas mixing. That's probably pretty important to understand. These numbers are also an underestimate, which is also wise to keep in mind. And, you know, their chart looks pretty spiky, kind of like ours. Ours is actually even more extreme. Of course, I mentioned we broke the records in terms of, you've seen the numbers by now, right? 500,000 plus cases yesterday. But we're breaking records not only day after day, but we're breaking records by 20% plus, you know, an additional 100,000 cases, or, you know, it's crazy. We also are going to break the speed record, and we did break the speed record on the last million new cases. We went past 55 million cases, and it took us only 2 days to do it. And, you know, it's Christmas, and lots of places are closed. The testing centers are closed. We're still breaking through and getting 1 million cases in 2 days, which is half the time that it took us to get 1 million cases at our previous peaks of last January. So yeah, we're breaking records, and we're breaking them by 100,000 at a time. All right, so let's see what else is going on in England. Positivity rates are also rising very steeply. Testing is not keeping up with cases. All regions rising fast. London highest and earliest, so you would expect to see that plateau and drop off in London, and I think that may have been what Greg was talking about more so than, you know, all of England or all of Great Britain plateauing. But she's warning us about that too. All regions rising fast, London highest and earliest. Do not take London's small case drop too seriously. That's the issue. The drop in pre-Christmas tests and positivity still rising. Plus, Christmas likely to boost again. So that is a pretty interesting thing. If that plateau is real and the slight drop-off is meaningful and was anticipated to continue, one thing will turn that around, and that's Christmas mixing. Remember that all of these numbers are people who would have caught it before Christmas, in all likelihood. Christmas will just make things worse. I think she's got a good point there. As I and many others warned a few weeks ago, we are now at the limit of how many tests we can do. And that means case numbers increasingly are a poor indicator of spread. Positivity is what we need to watch out for. The lack of tests also increases transmission, especially over the next holiday, New Year's. And she's got 4 screen grabs here. Well, let's see if these makes sense to share with everybody. Let's see, from Indy Sage briefing on December 17th. You might know better what that is than I do, but it is likely that there will soon be a testing crunch so that daily case numbers will no longer be reliable indicators of new infections. Then best sources are ONS Infection Survey, REACT studies, or hospital admissions, but these are lagged by at least another week. Plus, the King's College Symptom Tracker app will give the best real-time estimate of the trend. But that's a great point. If you can only perform, I don't know, arbitrarily 1 million tests a day, and you start posting 500,000 positive cases a day, or for that matter, 1 million positive cases a day, right? Everybody you test is positive. No matter how many people you test, you would continue to find more positive. If you had 2 million tests, you would post 2 million positives a day. But you only have 1 million tests a day. So you test everybody. Everybody's positive. 1 million, 1 million, 1 million, 1 million, 1 million. And then you would look at that chart from the outside, maybe not knowing what was going on the ground, and say, that's a plateau. Things are looking up. But it could mean something much, much worse, in fact. And why not think about that much, much worse thing? and assume that that's it and run around panicking. Don't run. Don't drive too fast. Take your time, but stock up. What's the other grab she has here? Lateral flow tests. We hear that all the time. Lateral flow tests to be constrained over the next 2 weeks, warns Sajid Javid. Supply of test kits squeezed despite new rules requiring their use to end quarantine early. That reminds me of another thing that's circulating out there on Twitter, is the picture of people getting free test kits in the mail, dropped through their mail slot right into their house over there in England. Pretty good idea and a good point made here, that it doesn't have to be this way in the United States. We could have made conscious decisions to do things differently, as with most things. All right, let's see. Moving on to the other screen grabs here. There continues to be supply issues with lateral flow tests and PCR appointments across the UK. Health officials say millions more tests will be made available by New Year's Eve, while Health Secretary Sajid Javid, in case you didn't remember who that was, has written to MPs saying the capacity will be tripled in January and February. Professor Peter Openshaw, who sits on the government's nerve tag, okay, well, you tell me what that means, but the advisory committee says that it is very worrying people could mix without testing because of these shortages. And it is. One more screen grab here of another headline. UK COVID test shortage amid New Year parties. Very worrying, says scientist. Noisy gatherings of untested people are perfect for spreading the virus, says a leading immunologist. That's just perfect. Moving on with Professor Pagel's thread here. Infections are still highest in 20 to 29-year-olds, but rising fast in all other age groups apart from under 10s. The rise in 60-plus age group is especially worrying, now approaching the level last seen in January's peak. Obviously, vaccine will make a massive difference, but how much higher cases will go is the question, especially with Christmas. And yes, cases are feeding into rapid rises in hospital admissions. I said we should expect increases after Christmas, and that is what we are seeing. Admissions are rising in all age groups. Again, these admissions are from infections pre-Christmas and just after Omicron dominance. And to, let's see, December 21st. What's up with December 21st? And to 21 December, 70 to 75% of COVID admissions for COVID. Many of the rest caught it in the hospital, which is not a good thing. That's of interest too. I did see something the other day about the number of pediatric patients in the hospital with COVID, that a large number of them were caught. They were admitted for something else, though it's not necessarily known that they caught it while they were in the hospital. They may have come in with it, but they were admitted for something else, and then they were tested while they were there because they want to know what they're dealing with, in addition to injuries or other illnesses. And it turns out that it was pretty widespread positivity among the kids being admitted, even though they didn't think they were coming there because of COVID. Let's see. What else have we got here? It does seem as if fewer admissions need intensive care, and that's good. But needing hospital is not a good thing and massively restricts NHS ability to treat other conditions, especially with so many staff sick. The other double whammy there. An NHS criteria based on the wards instead of ICU is still an NHS crisis. Interesting. So, what's next? Firstly, cases have not peaked yet. With Christmas and then New Year's mixing, likely to peak in early-ish January instead. Admissions will keep going up steeply. So far, admissions are higher than the recent LSHTM projections. London something, I would guess. I don't know. Maybe you tell me what but I'm not a doctor and I'm not an English doctor at that. But anyway, higher than projections, and have met SAGE prediction of greater than 2,000 by the end of the year. Warwick, also feeding into SAGE, published their projections today over a range of scenarios. I think we are in their Omicron 80% less severe than Delta and Plan B only scenario. Someone can decode that for us. This gives peak hospital admissions higher than last January, but with fewer deaths. That would be helpful. Putting in A short circuit break before Christmas or even on Boxing Day could have greatly reduced this peak. Returning slowly to normal from mid-January would have minimized resurgence. Note that admissions are already higher than Warwick peak in best case Plan B scenario of 90% less severe. NHS is planning for mini nightingales and tents in car parks. Staff shortages are causing massive problems for all care. We've recorded 1.4 million cases in England in the last 2 weeks alone. We had 1 million cases in the last 4 days. But anyway, now we have in the last 2 days. Even if Omicron is less severe, we know nothing about its long-term impact. Even if it's less likely to cause long COVID, hundreds of thousands more people are likely to suffer long COVID, affecting them and the economy. We've also done nothing to protect the schools, which will prolong Omicron wave and put kids at risk. New York is warning of rising admissions in young kids. They can't be vaxxed and rely on low community transmission to protect them. Let's see, still more here. The usual people out there are saying all will be fine soon. We just have to let people get infected and it'll be done, just as they did at previous waves. Mass prior infections have not stopped the Omicron wave, nor has mass vaccination. Omicron is not the last variant, in her view. And she includes some clips to, I guess, back that idea up. We've made tremendous progress in boosting adults. 75% of those eligible are now boosted. Our booster program, and you know how they spell that, will turn an absolute tragedy into a mere terrible period. But when will we realize that current vaccines cannot do it all on their own? We could have prevented the NHS strain over the next weeks. We could have prevented the economic damage of mass sickness in business. We could have invested in ventilation like Japan. We have not. Instead of prevention, we are planning hospital tents in car parks. Many, from government to scientists to the media to the public, have decided that 100,000 cases a day are fine. We are dangerously weakening our NHS and its staff. Too many people will end up with chronic illness and too many will die. All I can do is keep saying it's not fine. That's 18 of 18, but there's a prologue, or an epilogue rather here. P.S. Some have asked why I've not shown death data. Firstly, holiday reporting backlogs have made recent data non-informative. And secondly, any increases from Omicron wave won't show up for at least another week, likely longer. So just wait and see, you deathmongers. We'll find out later. Okay, so, all right, maybe not too much to be read into what happened in London and whether it's a real plateau or not. Just a warning sign. Wanted to keep that in mind here. Okay, let's see. Other things to look at here. All right. Where is this one that I got sent? There was another story. Maybe it's in my email. But something that has grabbed a lot of attention lately that I guess I wasn't necessarily thinking of spending time on, but it's grabbed an awful lot of attention, including the attention of the production staff here at KITM headquarters who sent it to me. You would likely have seen this. We made brief mention of the LA police shooting from the other day that unfortunately killed the 14-year-old girl trying on dresses for her quinceañera at Burlington Coat Factory. It was a horrible situation. By the way, they've released an awful lot of police video on that. And this morning, some controversial writings from somebody I don't know offhand and haven't read, but I've seen a lot of people passing this thing around. I guess we could dig it up and look at it and just frustrate ourselves. But making an argument that isn't even necessarily totally baseless, but just, I don't know, not the right time to, I don't know when the right time to discuss it is, but basically saying, listen, you shouldn't be treating this exactly like every other police shooting, but, well, you should. I mean, police shooting is a police shooting, but in other words, you shouldn't be treating this as though police were targeting this, well, certainly not this girl or any minority or in particular, as they very often do, in direct confrontations. This was an accident. This is what they're trying to say. And that the officers who were there, if you view the video and read the whole story about what happened, of course, there's a maniac in the store beating people, seemingly at random, with a heavy-duty bicycle lock, like a chain with a lock at the end, and he's just beating people, and the cops come in and understandably want to put a stop to that, and they can't see what's going on in the dressing rooms and behind the walls. But of course, you're supposed to be aware of that, especially with super high-powered weapons that they brought with them. Apparently, it was a round that skipped off the floor and then jumped back up and went through the wall that killed this girl. But whoever it was writing to say, this is not necessarily a bad person here. This is a cop that's trying to save lives in the store by taking out this maniac. And I get that, but, we're not ready to actually consider that yet, probably. And also, again, we're just back to the idea of, well, why is everything a shooting situation for the cops? I know it's very difficult to evaluate what goes on, of course, in the heat of a moment like that, especially when you're like, well, you don't know what's in the background of your line of fire, so don't shoot. But, when there's walls in the way, psychologically, at some level, you're like, I can see that there's nobody here. All it is a wall. It should be fine, and it's not fine, and bullets go through walls, especially, drywall interior walls. And they did, and we all see the results of it. But again, like, why is it that the response to this guy is to shoot? He's dangerous. I understand that. He's got a weapon. That's true. They may or may not have known. It's unclear at this point if they knew exactly what the weapon was. They could be, worried about getting shot. But again, they've gone there. This is a tactical unit that has responded. They've got tactical weapons. I assume the tactical vests are there too. I do feel like, they could take a split second and put themselves in a little more danger than a normal, a civilian responder could be expected to do, and assess the situation. And of course, they're tasing people left and right. They couldn't tase this guy. Tasers don't go through walls. And even if they do, pretty good chance that you don't kill anybody with them. So, I don't know. Where's all that stuff? Where's the sophisticated weaponry that they could have been using on this guy? Well, they had the AR-15s, so they brought them. So, everyone, I think, properly up in arms, not really ready to process the idea of this could have been just a gigantic mistake because we're busy mourning the outrageous death of this child. And, come time to review the action, or if there are any civil suits or for that matter, criminal trials for it, I think that'll be the time for those sentiments. But she's not completely wrong in all that either, but she's getting brutalized for saying it. So, we'll stay off the topic for now. I haven't read exactly what she said. It might be that the rest of the article is just horribly offensive. I've just seen other people tweeting about the headline in it and wondering what's going on with it. Maybe we'll check in on it. Maybe we won't. But let's focus on this other one that has captured a lot of attention in the New York Times thanks to this headline. After 4 killings, Officer of the Year is still on the job. And this, I think, grabbed a lot of eyeballs. A Pennsylvania state trooper was returned to duty following 3 investigations by his own agency. A 4th inquiry is underway. They must have just the worst criminals in the world there at some corner of Pennsylvania where this guy is on patrol. Kim Barker, Steve Eder, E-D-E-R, and David Kilpatrick are on the byline for this, datelined Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I have some idea where that is. In November 2008, Pennsylvania trooper Jay Splain, like mansplain, but Jay Splain instead, was honored at a county law enforcement banquet as a hero, the police officer of the year. The reason? He had shot and killed a suicidal man who allegedly pointed an Uzi submachine gun at him. Well, that is worrisome. That was the first killing. Trooper Splain went on to fatally shoot 3 more people in separate incidents, an extraordinary tally for an officer responsible for patrolling largely rural areas with low rates of violent crime. That's the angle of interest on this. All 4 who died were troubled, struggling with drugs, mental illness, or both. In 2 cases, including that of the man with the Uzi, family members had called the police for help because their relatives had threatened to kill themselves. So he took care of it for them. The most recent death was last month when Trooper Splain shot an unarmed man in his Volkswagen Beetle. Dangerous thing, a Beetle. After learning that the officer had previously killed 3 other people over nearly 15 years, the man's sister, Autumn Krause, asked, why would that person still be employed? That does seem like a valid question, doesn't it? Trooper Splain is an outlier. Most officers never fire their weapons, and until now his full record of killings has not been disclosed. Well, no wonder then. The Pennsylvania State Police have even successfully fought a lawsuit seeking to identify him and provide other details in one shooting. In the agency's more than a century of policing, no officer has ever been prosecuted for fatally shooting someone, according to a spokesman. That history aligns with the long-standing pattern across the country of little accountability for police officers' use of deadly force. Prosecutors and a grand jury concluded that Trooper Splain's first 3 lethal shootings were justified, and an inquiry into the most recent one is ongoing. Rather than have independent outsiders, though, look into the killings, the police agency has conducted its own investigations, which were led by officers from his unit, raising questions about the rigor of the inquiries. And that is a good question. When a police officer has shot at and potentially killed a civilian, the public will never trust the police agency to investigate itself and be unbiased, said Tom Hogan, the former district attorney of Chester County, Pennsylvania. A Republican, he helped write, I've lost my place here. He helped write recommendations by the State Prosecutors Association for independent investigations. A reform that many departments resist, but one sought by the National Prosecutors Association and major policing groups. In its review of Trooper Splain's killings, the New York Times found inconsistencies between the evidence of what occurred and what the state police said had happened. The officer appeared to have departed from police protocols in several of the fatal confrontations, according to interviews and an examination of investigative and court records. My. Pretty amazing what you can find when you look into it. We'll be right back. Welcome back down to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I'm starting to take a look. This is actually, quite a long article. I don't know that I don't know whether we should go all the way through it, but it sometimes pays to hear all the details that they've dug up here. And as I mentioned, they found inconsistencies, let's say, between what the police said had happened in these cases and the evidentiary record that they examined. But let's read at least a little bit more. In 3 of the encounters, the people killed were in vehicles. The trooper shot 2 unarmed drivers because they were allegedly using their vehicles as weapons, a frequent rationale, the Times found in an earlier investigation, that uncovered hundreds of seemingly avoidable killings by the police, often with impunity. Many large police departments ban shooting at moving vehicles because it is very often dangerous, ineffective, and unnecessary. Trooper Splain, who is on desk duty until the pending inquiry is completed, did not return calls or reply to a letter seeking comment. I'll not be surprised by that, of course. The other troopers who were involved in the shootings or who led the investigations declined to comment or did not respond to messages. David Kennedy, the president of the State Troopers Union, responded on Trooper Splain's behalf to written questions, saying he had acted with courage and, quote, was forced to make split-second decisions no one hopes they ever have to make. That's questionable syntax. Corporal Brent Miller, a spokesman for the Pennsylvania State Police, said, "We are confident we have the resources to investigate such incidents thoroughly and objectively." Now, whether they're using them or not is another question, I guess. But he referred questions on the killings to district attorneys. Asked whether Trooper Splain had ever faced disciplinary action, Corporal Miller said that any such records were confidential. Okay. I don't know. I think maybe there should be more disclosure about these things if you're going to carry badges and guns on our behalf, but whatever. All troopers involved in shootings must attend specialized training to assess their physical and mental fitness before returning to active duty, he said, adding that in some cases troopers may also be required to undergo use of force training at the police academy. Any word on whether he has? Don't know. Darrell W. Stevens, a former longtime police chief who now helps run a policing research institute at Florida State University, called the 4 shootings a red flag. 4 is incredibly unusual, he said. That is out there on the edge. Even if the shootings can be legally justified, he said, the pattern needs to be examined very closely to determine why the same officer repeatedly resorted to deadly force. Because they can, it doesn't mean that they should, he said. And we don't really even know if they can. Anyway, it's not clear how common it is for police officers to fatally shoot multiple people during their careers. Can you believe that? I mean, you'd think you should be able to look that up in the computer, right? But no database keeps track. In 2012, an officer in Scottsdale, Arizona, retired after his 6th fatal shooting. In 2015, a sheriff's deputy in Broward County, Florida, was involved in his 4th fatal shooting. Both officers belonged to SWAT teams called into dangerous situations where gunfire is most common. Trooper Splain, at 41, is a patrol officer who works in largely rural swaths of Pennsylvania, where the state police rarely kill anyone. During his time on the force, he has been responsible for 4 of the 9 fatal shootings by troopers in the 3 counties where they occurred, according to a Times analysis of cases identified by the research group Fatal Encounters. The killings by Trooper Splain were reported by local news outlets, although he was mentioned by name in only 1 case. That will help in sorting things out, right? Has this guy ever shot more people? I have this feeling that that's the case. Well, if the newspapers don't identify him, it's hard to figure it out. Well, anyway, from a young age, Jay Splain seemed inspired by the military. The son of a radiologist and a nurse, he grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and attended the elite Hill Prep School outside Philadelphia. He belonged to the school's gun club. His senior yearbook page pictured him holding a rifle, cited the motto of the U.S. Marine Corps, and quoted Stonewall Jackson, the Confederate general, twice. Well, and then I guess no surprise that he went on to the Virginia Military Institute, where Jackson had once been an artillery instructor. Jay Splain enrolled in a military officer training program, joined the school's competitive rifle team and the Semper Fi Society, and referred to his warrior image in his college yearbook bio. But in 2004, Mr. Splain became a state trooper with duties like making DUI arrests, tracking down thieves, and on one occasion, catching a suspect in a paintball incident. State police newsletters show his former college roommate, Army Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Shallcross, said that his ambitions had shifted during college from the military to law enforcement. Trooper Splain, the lieutenant colonel said, saw himself as a protector. It is interesting that he didn't go into the military. Must have been a real lack of opportunity in the military. We probably weren't using them very much in very many countries and giving people lots of fun and adventurous ways to indulge their fantasies. So he decided to do that here at home, practicing on us. Trooper Splain, the lieutenant colonel said, saw himself as a protector, right? Okay, but he didn't want to go abroad to protect. He wanted to stay here and do it. All right, next section up here, a call for help. I guess they're going to describe the backgrounds of these killings. Let me say this. At this point, I might just stop. I mean, I feel like everybody deserves to have their story told, but I think we're getting the idea behind this guy. I wanted to share with you also this thought that I put away in pocket. Tweet from Nathan Bernhardt. Do I have that right? Nathan Bernhardt, who's I'm a little confused as to what's going on here. His label is Nathan Bernhardt, but his Twitter address is John Bernhardt, Jon. So if you're looking for him, at Jon Bernhardt, Bernhardt, blue checkmark kind of guy who identifies himself thus in the Twitter bio, co-host of Patch Notes, let's see, video game reviews, and an editor on Goonhammer, or unless that's Go On Hammer. Goonhammer is another way of reading it if it's all one word, as is the case with, okay, here, yeah, it is Goonhammer, okay. Anyway, what is Goonhammer? It's a traditional games site on the web. I don't know why it's traditional, but it is. So there you go. Anyway, Nathan Bernhardt had this interesting thing to say about this article. I don't know where he gets it from, but it sounds like the sort of thing that, I don't know, sounds truthy enough. Let's think about the possibility that this is true. He says there's been a lot of astonishment over him getting Officer of the Year at all, but, you know, especially getting Officer of the Year for killing this guy, for, as he says, for executing a troubled man. And it's worth noting, this is something to think about, a lot of departments hand out that award explicitly to officers who have done questionable kills. You might wonder why. Like, why are they celebrating their deaths and the killings? No, they're handing out these awards to those involved so that they can bring it up in court as testimony as to their character. That is clever. I don't know if it's true. It's almost, you know, it's a good idea if you're one of them and you think that that's something that, I mean, you know, what about that, right? If they're being charged with the killing or for whatever other reason they're there, if they're there as part of an inquiry into the killing, or they've been charged, or it's a criminal case involving one of the accomplices of the person killed, and the officers are testifying, but isn't it true that you shot this guy, and did you really need to, et cetera, et cetera? Well, I don't know. I'm Officer of the Year, I'll tell you that. And, Officer of the Year, says the jury. You know, we got to listen to this guy. They give too much deference to the police in court as it is, much less the Officer of the Year. That's an interesting thought. I don't know what lies behind it, but it's an interesting one to entertain. You know, and he says not all of them, of course, but take a look back through the rolls in certain jurisdictions and FOPs, Fraternal Order of Police. Is that what we're talking about? Like their records, or are we looking at something else? FOP in this context reminds me of the union. Anyway, he says you'll find a pattern. And, well, I'll take it for what it's worth. It's a seed for an interesting thought. Might be something worth looking into. All right. Maybe what we can do is we can read one of the stories of one of these killings just to give some due to the victims here, and you get the idea of how they're being described and the terms in which the Times is describing things. Here, first one is a call for help. In July of 2007, Joseph Rotkowicz, I don't know, Rotkewiczz, a common type of like Central European surname that you find in that area of Pennsylvania, who had a bipolar disorder, took two of his brother's guns into a room of his family's home and repeatedly threatened to kill himself, pointing a gun at his head. His father had recently died, and his girlfriend had had an affair with his best friend. Rough times, right? For an hour, his sister, Linda Hunsicker, I'm glad she got married so we could get a different surname involved here, and a friend, Hans Frendt, it's a good name for a friend, tried to talk him down. Ms. Hunsicker recalled in an interview. Then Mr. Rotkowicz fired at least 2 shots at the ceiling. Ms. Hunsicker said her brother never threatened her or Mr. Frendt. He just kept begging me not to call the cops. She recalled in an interview, I wish I would have listened. Emergency operators told her to go outside. The 2 men stayed indoors. Mr. Rotkowicz used electrical tape to strap the Uzi to his neck and chest so the barrel pointed up at his chin, Mr. Frendt later said. At about 5 p.m., at least a dozen state troopers showed up, Ms. Hunsicker recalled. A specially trained SWAT-style negotiating team typically responds to such situations. Police tried once to call the house, but Ms. Hunsicker had brought the cordless phone out with her. With a person threatening to harm only himself, the overarching principle is slow things down and don't force a confrontation, said Ashley Heiberger, a consultant to police departments and a former captain in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Entering a house to challenge someone threatening suicide is not consistent with generally accepted law enforcement practices, he added. And good officers and good agencies have been emphasizing these concepts and principles for decades. Current Pennsylvania State Police regulations call for troopers dealing with someone who's mentally ill to take steps to calm and de-escalate the situation when feasible and to assume a quiet, non-threatening manner. So send the VMI guy, I guess. Ms. Hunziker said no one had used a bullhorn or tried other ways to resolve her brother's crisis peacefully. Instead, Trooper Splain and another trooper eventually entered the house. Mr. Frent, still inside, later told the deputy coroner that the troopers ordered him to leave, the coroner's report said. On his way out, he heard one of them demand that Mr. Rotkowitz drop his weapon, followed by 2 gunshots, the report said. Now remember, that weapon is, of course, taped to his body. Trooper Splain shot Mr. Rotkowitz twice in the chest. Records show, I guess shooting around the Uzi. Don't damage the Uzi. Pennsylvania State Police later said that Mr. Rotkowitz had pointed the Uzi at Trooper Splain. Seems difficult to do with the tape on all that. For this, the unit named him Trooper of the Year. In a letter later nominating Trooper Splain for the Lehigh County Officer of the Year, his commanding officer wrote that Mr. Rotkowitz had a history of mental disease and was threatening his life and the lives of others. Trooper Splain had seen Mr. Rotkowitz holding the Uzi beneath his chin, the letter said, but it did not mention any electrical tape. The letter then said Mr. Rotkowitz ignored repeated orders from Trooper Splain to stop and drop the firearm and lowered the gun forward toward the trooper. In a court filing years later, a lawyer for the state police acknowledged that Mr. Rotkowitz had affixed the Uzi to his chest and neck by means of the black-colored electrical tape. Although it's possible Mr. Rotkowitz broke the tape, the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy wrote the tape had been wrapped several times about the neck and is kinked in several areas. The Pennsylvania State Police typically assign a lead investigator from the same troop's major case team to lead the criminal inquiry. At the time, Trooper Splain worked out of the headquarters of Troop M, the same barracks as the lead investigator. Joseph Kuhns, a criminologist at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, who did a study for the Major Cities Chiefs Association, on investigations of police shootings, called it highly unusual to assign officers from the same unit to examine a shooting. For almost 10 years, the state police resisted Ms. Hunziker's efforts to obtain the police investigative report so she could find out what happened to her brother. In a court filing, her lawyer said the police's refusal to provide the report was an effort to cover up wrongful conduct. She didn't know the name of the officer who killed her brother until a Times reporter told her. James B. Martin, a Republican who is the longtime district attorney of Lehigh County, said in an interview that after meeting with the lead investigator, he had ruled the shooting justified, a decision he called a no-brainer. He said he did not recall any claims that the gun had been taped to Mr. Rotkowitz. Mr. Martin saw nothing wrong with allowing the police to investigate themselves. The Pennsylvania State Police is a troop of 4,500 very well qualified police officers who do an excellent job, and their integrity, as far as I'm concerned, is beyond reproach, he said, and so there will be no reproach from him. A similar case outlined here with the victim Anthony Ardo, who also had threatened to kill himself, this time by blowing his head off with an explosive. Addicted to drugs for years, the 47-year-old was reeling after a breakup and being evicted by his mother. After she called 911 seeking help for him, Trooper Splain and a junior trooper, Eddie Pagan, came to her family farm and persuaded her to lure him back. Mr. Ardo pulled up, but then appeared to reverse his Buick Reatta, according to the officer's accounts, and rather than let him go, the troopers ran out the back door and got in their 2 patrol cars, hidden from view. They trapped the Buick between their cruisers, hopped out, and drew their firearms, the troopers told police investigators. Within seconds, the troopers began shooting, according to his mom, Mrs. Monahan. Lawyers for Ms. Monahan said they believe that Trooper Splain, who fired 9 times, killed Mr. Ardo with the last 3 bullets. The trooper later said they feared for their lives, according to court filings, as Mr. Ardo, sitting in the driver's seat, appeared to be lighting something around his neck. That turned out to be a common aerial firework. Oh, well. So you get the idea of what's going on here. There are several other similar events, and I recommend it, I suppose, as a, rather maudlin weekend read, but much talked about, and so it probably would pay to read the rest of the background for yourself and know what your friends and acquaintances are chatting about on social media when they point to this thing. And an interesting idea about the possibility that these awards are given out with the idea that they be used to defend these officers in court. Kind of interesting. Okay, let's see a couple other stories that I thought it would be interesting to share with you here. I guess skipping around a little bit in terms of what we're covering, wanted to jump over to this thread that I had seen tweeted about the Senate testimony for, I guess, who did he speak to? Was it the Senate Judiciary Committee interviewing B.J. Pak. You remember that name? B.J. Pak was the U.S. Attorney for Northern Georgia, who was forced to resign by Trump because he wouldn't play along with the claims of voter fraud in Georgia. Do you remember this? I always wondered when they'd get back to asking him some questions about what was going on. And so they have. I'm reading the tweet thread of Jay Bookman, journalist and author and a columnist for the Georgia Recorder, who says he's just read through Pak's sworn testimony, and several things, he says, pop out at me. He provides a link to the full transcript as well, but let's talk about the highlights. First of all, the entire Department of Justice, Pak included, was under immense White House pressure to pretend that fraud existed and thus give credibility to Trump's attempt to overturn the election and stay in power. And second, the things that jumped out at him, Attorney General Bill Barr's resignation in the midst of that pressure was an act of cowardice. Very interesting, and probably what everybody thought at the time. Now, third item here, Jeff Clark, the rogue official serving as Trump's mole within the DOJ, even launched his own off-the-books improper backdoor investigation, quote-unquote investigation, of alleged vote fraud here in Georgia. News to me and to Pak at the time, too. Interesting as well. Pak himself acted honorably and professionally under duress, says Bookman. Pak was very upset, very disappointed by Trump's infamous call to Raffensperger. We talk about that all the time. He saw it as an effort by Trump to overturn the election and to falsely represent that there were irregularities in the Georgia election when investigation had proved that there were none. All very interesting. Not surprising conclusions, but certainly helpful in terms of reaffirming what we thought might have been the case. It'd be very interesting to read through the transcript of the entire interview, but it's 139 pages, so we won't be doing that. But the link to it is there if you want to take a look for yourself. So thanks to Jay Bookman for pulling out what appear to be the highlights of this. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it and seeing it getting written up in longer form with more points to digest in the near future. But just putting B.J. Pak's name back on the radar, I think probably wise to do. Let's see. Other things to share with you here. It's a good thing to do is to clean things up on Friday. Yes. How about this one? Why don't we read a little bit from this as we enter into the end of this segment and the beginning of the next. Let me jump back out of this in pocket here. This came to me as part of, let's see, this tweet here from Jay Willis. Jay Willis, editor-in-chief of what? Balls Strikes. I guess thinking like balls and strikes like Chief Justice Roberts says here. Editor-in-chief of Balls and Strikes. I write about courts, democracy, and the legal system. Okay. So, and pointing here to the Eric Levitz piece in New York Magazine and saying, a good and correct take from Eric Levitz. Shall we read the whole thing or just the highlight? Well, why don't we read the whole thing if we can. But I like the idea. The highlight that he pointed to struck me as, that is a good and correct take. So what if we read the entirety of the take? How long would that take us to read this take? Or can we read it? We might not be able to. We might have to read it in pocket. Yeah, we might have to read the pocket version of it. I hope we can do that, because otherwise we're stuck with just the highlight. And that might be the case. Well, let's see. Oh, no, here we go. Eric Levitz, who follows me on Twitter, so I'll apologize for not subscribing to New York Magazine and paying for your excellent work. There's only so much I can do, and that's probably well within reason to actually do, but I use the excuse because then otherwise I'm subscribing to everything. And then I'm out of money. But anyway, let's at least credit you for your work, Eric. Why is John Roberts so popular among Democrats? Like, you might wonder, where is this going? Let's see. I think we might be able to get through a major part of this and finish up on the other side here. Good question. What does this mean? Earlier this month, Gallup gauged American sentiment toward 11 of the nation's most prominent public figures. Only one boasted majority support from both Democrats and Republicans, and he happens to be the most effective conservative politician of the modern era. This is why I like the take. That's true. Good recognition of the fact, and how interesting that he would be popular on a bipartisan basis. During his tenure on the Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Roberts has voted to gut the Voting Rights Act, ban limitations on corporate political spending, effectively legalize most forms of political bribery, rewrite the Affordable Care Act in a manner that cost millions of Americans access to Medicaid, restrict the capacity of consumers and workers to sue corporations that abuse them, nullify state-level school desegregation efforts, sanction partisan gerrymandering, and carve gaping loopholes into Roe v. Wade. And Roberts nevertheless retains the approval of 55% of Democratic voters, along with 57% of Republican voters, in Gallup's new poll. No other official in the survey, not Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, either party's congressional leadership, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, or Dr. Anthony Fauci, claimed majority support in both blue and red America. For progressives, this is a troubling finding, if not an entirely surprising one. The disconnect between the Roberts Court's reactionary jurisprudence and its benign public image is long-standing, thanks in part to a pair of high-salience 5-4 rulings that delivered victories for liberals: Roberts' decision to preserve the bulk of the Affordable Care Act in 2012, and former Justice Anthony Kennedy's to honor same-sex couples' right to marry in 2015. Democrats actually expressed more approval than Republicans for the majority conservative Supreme Court for much of the last decade. That is interesting. Still, the Roberts Court isn't what it used to be. Kennedy is gone, and Brett Kavanaugh, a longtime GOP apparatchik who cast himself as a victim of Clintonian persecution at his confirmation hearings, has taken the former swing justice's place. That's in quotes, swing. Meanwhile, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's erstwhile seat is now occupied by Amy Coney Barrett, possibly the most right-wing justice in the court's modern history. The conservative majority has thus grown both larger and more reactionary, and that development threatens to decide decades-long culture war battles in the right's favor. Chief among these is the fight over reproductive freedom. The Gallup survey was conducted in the immediate aftermath of oral arguments in Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization. At issue in that case is whether states are constitutionally forbidden from outlawing abortion in cases where the fetus has not attained viability, which generally occurs around the 24th week of pregnancy. The Supreme Court upheld this standard in the 1992 Planned Parenthood v. Casey case. In 2021, however, the court's conservatives indicated at oral arguments that they were not inclined to preserve the rights established by Roe and affirmed by Casey, and Roberts was by no means an exception. Nevertheless, Despite high-profile coverage of the case and consistent majority support for Roe in public opinion polls, Roberts managed to retain his status as an exceptionally non-polarizing public official, which is somewhat alarming. According to one recent analysis, conservatives are now likely to retain a majority on the Supreme Court into the 2050s. If the court's right-wing majority finds that it can continually push the boundaries of conservative judicial activism without undermining its own popular legitimacy, as we're trying to help them do, then the consequences for progressivism and popular democracy could be dire. That is an excellent point, and well worth considering. I'm a second or two behind in the music here, so we'll leave a little bit early, come back after the break, and continue with this piece.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with the reading of this piece from Eric Levitz here, because we haven't gotten to the part that Jay Willis picked out as the good part that caught my eye here. We're still trying to find it. I know where it is. Well, I mean, I know exactly what it says, but I want you to hear the whole context because it's a good piece. And this makes an excellent point. It's a little worrying, right? Or as he says, somewhat alarming. I'll remind you with this paragraph, according to one recent analysis, conservatives are now likely to retain a majority on the Supreme Court into the 2050s. If the court's right-wing majority finds that it can continually push the boundaries of conservative judicial activism without undermining its own popular legitimacy, then the consequences for progressivism and popular democracy could be dire. I mean, Alito was working hard as if he thinks they're in danger of doing it, but it might be just preemptive work because apparently the polling says it's not happening. We got our work cut out for us here. In some respects, the conservative movement's focus on the courts has been a testament to its weakness. There is no popular majority for banning abortion, scaling back the welfare state, or eroding basic labor or consumer protections in the United States. And judging by the millennial and Zoomer generation's political views, there never will be. Under Trump, the right responded to this reality by rapidly stocking the judiciary with as many 40-something reactionaries as it could find. Some liberals look at this aspect of the Trump legacy and comfort themselves with the thought that the courts are a weak institution. John Roberts commands no divisions. Judicial review is not in the Constitution, and historically the Supreme Court has adjusted its jurisprudence to match prevailing political sentiment. But this is little consolation if the Roberts Court can abet minority rule while retaining majority approval. Now, I don't know that they can, but he's worried that they might. Given the things that they've done, they should have no majority approval among liberal voters, but they do, and he does, and that's unusual. So I guess with that in mind, I guess it's entirely possible. You got to entertain the possibility that they might simply do what we've been worried that they would do for a long time, and we discussed it yesterday. Just simply say you're all pretty wrong about your understanding of how America works. The number of votes that you get is not nearly as important as what we say when the question is who won the election. Local elections officials say This other person with fewer votes won the election, and we find no reason to reverse that, or we find reason to affirmatively stand behind that. However they choose to approach it, there being no appeal from the Supreme Court, you might be stuck with that answer. If you believe, one, in the rule of law, and two, that is what the Supreme Court is dealing in, the rule of law. It isn't, but if you come to that conclusion, you'll probably sit by and do nothing, but wish you had done something, perhaps. On the other hand, it's entirely possible that they may hand down a ruling like that, and America just says, forget it, that's enough, we can't take it anymore. The Supreme Court is no longer held in high esteem, but that's not a very powerful reaction either. You would have to be looking for a reaction more along the lines of, the Supreme Court is crap now, and we all will tell pollsters that we hate them when they come around to ask us finally. But in the meantime, we're also going to burn the whole place down and tar and feather them all. Well, that's a different reaction. But it's been a long time since anybody has felt that was an appropriate reaction. Anyway, as we say, this is little consolation that he commands no divisions, etc., when the court can abet minority rule while retaining majority approval. And to a great extent, it has already done so. The Chief Justice managed to gut one of the civil rights movement's signature legacies, the Voting Rights Bill, right after the Senate had unanimously reauthorized it, by the way, without forfeiting his aura of moderate statesmanship. That is quite an accomplishment. The big question looming over America's judicial politics has been, what happens when the 6-3 court comes for Roe? Or the rights of blue states like New York to tightly regulate handgun ownership, or various other pillars of the contemporary culture war settlement. There is some basis for believing that the Roberts Court is about to discover the limit of the public's tolerance for right-wing minority rule. In September of this year, shortly after the Supreme Court declined to preempt a Texas law that effectively banned abortion through vigilante justice, approval of the Supreme Court cratered in Gallup's polling. As of July 2021, 49% of Americans approved of the court, including 51% of Democrats. 2 months later, those figures had fallen to 40% of Americans and 36% of Democrats, respectively. Gallup's September poll may prove to be an outlier. Never in the pollster's history had it found such low approval for America's high court. And the fact that just 3 months later it found a supermajority of Americans approving of John Roberts underscores the possibility that September's results mainly reflect a distorted sample. On the other hand, it is possible that the September figures reflect discontent about the court's initial ruling on the Texas abortion law and therefore offers a preview of a broader and more intense backlash to come. And yet, even if public opinion turns against the court, it's not clear that progressives will be in a position to translate that backlash into meaningful reform. Overturning Roe may be unpopular, but so is expanding the Supreme Court. Not for me, but I guess generally. Amid the Amy Coney Barrett hearings in 2020, a New York Times Siena College poll found that 58% of Americans opposed increasing the number of justices on the High Court, while 31% supported it. It is difficult to see how the court's power could be meaningfully checked, at least in the medium term. To force Joe Manchin's hand on Supreme Court reform, the backlash to the Roberts Court would need to extend far into red America. After the 2022 midterms, meanwhile, Republicans are likely to control at least one chamber of Congress. In other words, even if the court overreaches on abortion and forfeits its popular support, the conservative judicial project is likely to endure. And given Roberts' current poll numbers, it's not even clear that Roe's invalidation will durably erode public reverence for the judiciary. No matter how events unfurl from here, this is the part that it's the end too, that got highlighted in Jay Willis's tweet. No matter how events unfurl from here, Roberts has already established himself as the greatest Republican politician of his generation. Now, you wouldn't have thought that maybe, but Armando will probably remind you that this is the case, that he is a Republican politician. But what about this assessment, that he's the greatest Republican politician of his generation? Well, no other conservative has managed to realize as many of the movement's ideological goals at so little political cost. And if you don't think that Roberts can be fairly described as a politician, well, that only confirms the enormity of his achievement. That really sums it up pretty well. That's a short little paragraph that has a lot packed into it, but read by itself maybe doesn't have the impact. That's why I was glad to spend the time reading over. Once again, the impact, just to remind you what we're talking about, I'm going to read you that second paragraph again. During his tenure on the Supreme Court, Chief Justice John Roberts has voted to gut the Voting Rights Act, ban limitations on corporate political spending, effectively legalize most forms of political bribery. We remember the Bob McDonnell cases, right? So that's what I think we're thinking of here. Effectively legalize most forms of political bribery, rewrite the Affordable Care Act in a manner that costs millions of Americans access to Medicaid, restrict the capacity of consumers and workers to sue corporations that abuse them, nullify state-level school desegregation efforts, that goes way back, sanction partisan gerrymandering, we'll pay for that pretty quickly, and carve gaping loopholes into Roe v. Wade. And imagine him retaining majority support in both parties. No other conservative has managed to realize as many of the movement's ideological goals at so little political cost. And of course, as Armando has always told us, if you don't think Roberts can be fairly described as a politician, that only confirms the enormity of his achievement. He did it and convinced you that he wasn't. That is pretty amazing. So, thanks to Eric Levitz for that, and the good folks at New York Magazine to whom I've paid nothing and perhaps should think about in the future. But okay, that's neither here nor there. Now, on to another subject to scare the crap out of you for the new year and all the time to come. Let's see. We mentioned this last Friday. I thought it was important to tell you about what was going on with the Russian mercenary army that Putin was assembling and using with more or less with impunity all over the place. And I worried that it might be possible that the Christmas holiday would be used as a distraction for a wider incursion into Ukraine. Of course, another holiday now looms, and this too could be used to distract from a movement into Ukraine. But what about this? Just to make it worse for you, from the Daily Beast. This is a Good Friday scare for you. Russian citizens are now being prepped for nuclear war. Oh, I didn't realize we were going to get into one. But in Russia, I guess they're convinced that we will. Julia Davis, the voice we hear so most often as the closest Russia observer on Twitter, watches their news all the time, writes this for the Daily Beast. Russian state TV is increasingly hysterical in its forecasts of an upcoming war. Did you know this? Warning domestic audiences that the conflict could even become nuclear. It is, of course, over Ukraine. The rhetoric on Kremlin-funded state television is amping up the sense of urgency around Russian President Vladimir Putin's NATO ultimatum. Did you know that there was one? Olga Skabieva, I'm guessing at that pronunciation, the host of state TV, the state TV show 60 Minutes, which I guess they can't sue them for because we're Russia, F you, said on Tuesday, the level of anxiety has reached its maximum. We're 20 days away from the expiration of the ultimatum, and the stakes are rising, even though it seems they couldn't be any higher. 20 days away. Now, mind you, this was dated December 21st. So 10 of those 20 days have ticked away. What ultimatum? I don't know, but I'm not NATO. One day after Moscow submitted a draft of its Russia-U.S. security treaty containing demands that NATO roll back its military deployments in Europe and deny membership to Ukraine and other post-Soviet countries, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, threatened that Moscow would raise the stakes if the West didn't treat its demands seriously. And here in the West, I can tell you, and you can attest to this, we're not even 100% sure not only what the demands are, but that you've made any. But over there, they're like, well, we might have to have a nuclear war. Everybody get ready. We may not be on the same page here, guys. On Monday, he told Interfax that Russia needs answers urgently because the situation is very difficult. Pro-Kremlin propagandists and state media experts filled in the blanks with what kind of escalation should be expected. On last Sunday's edition of News of the Week, state TV host Dmitry Kiselyov explained Russia, and an ellipsis here, Russia prepared and handed over to the Americans its written proposals on strategic stability, or more simply on the prevention of nuclear war, since we are already at a critical point, to be honest. It's simple. The U.S. and NATO must roll back from our borders. Otherwise, we will, figuratively speaking, roll up to their borders and create symmetrical, unacceptable risks. If you put a gun to our head, we will respond in kind. The whole point is that the development of the Ukrainian territory by the Western Bloc is not only Ukraine's business. This is a complete breakdown of the global balance, which poses an existential threat to Russia. In other words, for Russia, it is a matter of life and death. We simply will not allow it, regardless of the cost to us and regardless of the cost to those responsible for it. This is very concerning, not so much because of their aggressive language, but because we simply don't have the same understanding of what this confrontation, if there even is one, is all about. And we could be caught, if not off guard, unaware, at least, of the depth of their feeling here. Not that it's valid necessarily, but it's apparently out there, and we apparently have no idea about it. Kiselyov, notorious for his, I don't know how you pronounce it, notorious for his assertion that Russia is the only country that can reduce the U.S. to a pile of radioactive ash, revisited his beloved quote-unquote argument to explain why the United States will be willing to entertain Putin's unreasonable proposition. He asserted that Russia is willing to suffer any consequences and go to any lengths to get what it wants. Never before has anyone published the texts of the proposed treaties, but never before in the 21st century has the situation been so acute and the risks so great. Non-standard situations require non-standard approaches. Secondly, we're holding very strong cards in our hands. Our hypersonic weapons are guaranteed to produce a response that is so unpleasant for America to hear, being reduced to radioactive ash. And remember, by the way, that just about a week or so ago, our good friend Madison Cawthorn took to the airwaves here in the United States to say that, oh yeah, by the way, Russia's hypersonic weapons are so awesome they can reduce our entire naval fleet. They can defeat our entire naval fleet in an instant, and we'll have nothing we can do about it. And Russian state TV loved it and put it all over their air as well. So congratulations to Madison Cawthorn on that one. But I don't know. It's weird. We haven't been talking much about Russia's hypersonic weapons lately. Or at all, really. But Madison Cawthorn knows all about it. It's kind of weird. And he's been talking about it. And it's not because he's been doing his homework or studying or paying attention to legislative initiatives either. He doesn't do that. Anyway, Putin ordered 2 nuclear-capable long-range bombers to fly into European airspace this weekend. That would be last weekend. As they were dispatched, or even before, actually, since this is from December 21st, as they were dispatched to patrol Belarus. Just a week ago, Russia warned that it would redeploy intermediate-range nuclear weapons on its western flank in striking distance of Central Europe for the first time since they were banned in a 1987 treaty between Presidents Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. Everyone remembers that, right? The Reykjavik Accords. Anyway, There have also been grim signs of things to come from the Russian government. A new national standard for urgent burial of corpses in peacetime and wartime has been introduced by the government in recent months. It will come into force on February 1st, 2022, and specifies the burial in mass graves to be dug by bulldozers, disposing of as many as 1,000 bodies in a 24-hour time period. I don't know if they're talking about COVID here or not. I don't think so. But by the way, I think they've been faking their numbers for a long time as well. It could be, but also could be radiological in nature, that they're worried about mass disposal like this. Wow. We haven't been talking about doing that here, have we? No. Bodies are to be placed, it's very specific, in 4 layers, either in bags, wooden coffins, or zinc coffins, prepared in advance and subsequently covered with dirt. Well, that's how you do a burial. Then the mass graves will be compacted with a bulldozer, filled with a mineral binder, and equipped with devices for the absorption and neutralization of radioactive, hazardous chemicals and biological agents formed during the decomposition of corpses. Yikes. Russia's government agency responsible for the creation of the new standards did not respond to journalists' inquiries as to the purpose behind this effort. Military expert Alexander Goltz told newspaper Novye Izvestia, those who prepared these standards thought in terms of either a global epidemic, we have one of those, or global war, could have one of those, in which not only the military but also the civilian population would die. This is only possible with the use of nuclear weapons. Well, if you get around to the global war part. Anyway, former military spokesman Viktor Baranets, or Baranets, depending on how you want to try and pronounce that, concurred and added, it may turn out that we will have to send troops not only to Donetsk and the Lugansk regions, but also to the greater Ukraine. They hate using the in there, but greater Ukraine. We have a flaming fuse in the Black Sea region. There are also dangers in the region of Belarus and concerns in the Kaliningrad region. Remember, that's that weird Russian outpost that exists outside of what is considered the normal Russian borders and into Poland. There's this disconnect, a discontiguous Russian presence inside of what is otherwise Polish territory. And by the way, the flaming fuse in the Black Sea region, I should remind you, I didn't mention it specifically at the time when I was telling you what Madison Cawthorn was saying. It was the Black Sea Fleet. I didn't even realize we had a Black Sea Fleet. I don't think I'm keeping up to date on those things, but it was, that's what he was saying, that the Black Sea Fleet could be destroyed by these hypersonic missiles. I thought that was rather specific. Do we even have one? I guess I don't think that's like a place that we keep a naval fleet in the Black Sea. I guess we could, but don't. I don't know. That's an interesting question all by itself. But I think that would, it seems to me like it would be a surprising place. Not that we do have, I guess, ships that operate in the area, but I don't know if we keep a whole fleet there. Well, let's see. Look it up here. What does Business Insider have to say? U.S. warships went on another mission to a European hotspot, and Putin says they're in Russia's crosshairs. This was from November of this year. USS Mount Whitney with Romanian frigate Marasetti in the Black Sea. There they are in November of 2021. In early November, U.S. Navy ships, including the 6th Fleet's flagships, returned to the Black Sea. I don't know if they would be considered the Black Sea Fleet, but I guess they're actually operative there from out of the 6th Fleet, which is, I don't know, based where? I don't know. You probably know, Darwin, but, we'll see whether you answer me. We only got like 8 minutes to do it. All right, jumping back to the rest of this scary, scary stuff. Where were we in this? Oh, right. So, Kaliningrad, we mentioned there as well. There are also dangers in the region of Belarus. Right, remember, Belarus was inviting in refugees from further east, Middle Eastern refugees, etc., and then massing them on the border with Poland and pushing them across, and the Polish trying to turn them around and send them back. NATO, he goes on to say, has grandiose plans for the immediate capture of Kaliningrad. Did you know that? I don't know. Even with the use of nuclear weapons. I think that might be misstating our purposes here. And how then will we bury? That's their big question. They're jumping straight to how will we bury the people that NATO slaughters with nuclear weapons when they take over Kaliningrad? One by one or what? He added, we're getting ready for these major crises. Yikes. Chess legend and highly knowledgeable critic of the Kremlin, Garry Kasparov, who was way ahead of his time with his 2016 book, Winter is Coming, Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped, described the Russian government's creation of the mass burial standard as one of the signposts on the way to apocalypse. Could just be propaganda, but it's pretty scary, I agree. Propagandists on Russia's state-funded television stressed that Moscow is now approaching the West from a position of strength, I guess because they've taken over our government. Discussing the Kremlin's bold and unreasonable ultimatums to the U.S. and its allies, Kiselyov said, this is a moment of truth in our relations with America in which we move on to complete reciprocity. From a position of strength, we simply designate a cause and effect relationship. That's how it will be. With brazen arrogance of a seasoned mobster borrowed from The Godfather, Russia's top propagandist concluded, you over there in the U.S., NATO, and the EU, decide for yourself. Is Russia making an offer that can be refused? On Saturday, it would be really surprising to find out what they think about the reality, which is that over here in America, EU, and NATO, we're like, offer? What? I don't even know what you're talking about. I mean, they would consider that a huge insult, I'm sure, and it would just provoke them to more violence. But it is interesting that they think that there's this offer on the table that we're all shaking in our boots over. Well, maybe we should be, but we don't know that it's been made. And that's kind of an interesting thing, to say the least. On Saturday, and this was, again, 2 weeks ago, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko discussed Putin's ultimatum to the United States and NATO with pro-Kremlin propagandist Vladimir Solovyev, who donned a red hoodie emblazoned with a Soviet hammer and sickle emblem. And remember, Republicans love Russia and hate communism. Just want to put that out there. I mean, I think they might be lying about some or all of that, but okay. In an episode of Solovyev's show entitled NATO's Capitulation, Grushko said, the moment of truth has come. We have reached a red line, and our proposals aim to pull us away from this red line and start normal dialogue that will put security interests at the forefront. He described the Kremlin's hard-nosed demand to the West as throwing the rock into their swamp, and explained that Western refusal to play by Moscow's rules will lead to a military or military-technical response, with Russia creating counter-threats to the United States and its allies. On Monday, in response to the question as to whether Russia could deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told journalists, it's no secret that the deployment of various kinds of weapons near our borders, which can pose a danger to us, clearly requires adequate steps to balance the situation. Various options are available. It's typical gobbledygook, part of which stems from English being a second language for them, or translations being bad, I don't know which. But also, that's kind of the way they operate. In years past, Russian lawmakers have been advocating the placement of Russia's advanced weapons systems in Cuba. That always works out well. Central America and elsewhere, in America's underbelly. Those options likely remain on Moscow's menu. On Tuesday, state TV host Olga Skabiva pointed out, we're contemplating placing our nuclear weapons in Cuba or Venezuela, conveying the message that could be summed up as USSR or bust. Russia's national ice hockey team sparked outrage in Europe by wearing Soviet uniforms in Euro Hockey Tour's Channel 1 Cup in Moscow on Sunday. I wouldn't have predicted that sort of thing, but I guess they're trolling us, or maybe they're trolling the Republicans who love Russia so much and say, remember, they're not communists anymore. And, poof, look, they are. Wow, you were wrong. The return to Soviet imagery is in total coordination with Putin's ultimatum to the West that seeks a rematch in the Cold War that was lost by the Soviet Union. On Monday, Skabiva surmised the United States have to sign off on the notion that their hegemony is over. She added, the declaration about a military response is being made by our Foreign Affairs Ministry, which never happened before. Russia is placing the United States in a no-win situation. Either they retreat voluntarily, or we will force them to retreat. At the same time, Russia is not taking any obligations upon itself with respect to the preservation of Ukraine, much less its sovereignty. Well, I don't know what to make of it because we haven't talked about it. No one here even knows it's going on, and I don't know whether that's worse to insult them by pointing that out or not, or maybe it's all bluster, or maybe it's all for domestic consumption. Very interesting that they choose to troll everybody with the readoption of Soviet imagery. But it's sort of new Sovietism in which they actually are hyper-capitalists and mobsters and steal all the money and have no intention of even putting on a show of communist egalitarianism, even though it was a show the first time around. Well, maybe you would say, actually, that's the way it developed the first time around, if you were an old hand. Maybe Gary Kasparov would have that to say. I don't know. Anyway, just wanted to scare the crap out of you before setting you loose for the weekend. I think I did it.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, I don't think it's Justice's intention to scare the crap out of you in the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next. I'd stay tuned and see if he can lift your spirits. Let's see what he's got on tap here. Oh, look at this. The New Jersey Supreme Court revived a gender bias suit brought by a former town manager. That's nice and easy and domestic. Let's consume it, shall we?